welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out today. Thank you for being at Data and AI Summit. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about our latest certification, Generative AI Engineer Associate. So this is a certification that we have really high hopes for. We think it's going to be really useful and relevant to a lot of people. So we're really excited to be able to talk to you about it today.
Okay, great. Hi, I'd like to introduce myself, and Corey will introduce himself as well. My name is Kantor. I'm the Senior Certification Developer at Databricks. I've been at Databricks almost going on a year. Been doing certification for about 10 years. I was the exam development lead, and Mr. Corey Abshire, who's going to introduce himself, was one of the main experts to develop this exam. So go ahead.
Yeah, so Corey Abshire, I'm a Senior Specialist Solutions Architect at Databricks. I'm focused on machine learning in our communications, media, and entertainment vertical. I've been with Databricks for about 2 years, and earlier this year I had the opportunity to get involved in the development of this exam, which was great. So it was amazing to see it unfold over the last several months. It was really interesting for me because even though I've been through a lot of certifications in the past, this is the first time I've ever actually got to, find out how the sausage is made, sort of thing. So get to work with pros like James to see all the work that goes into this thing. And it was a huge team effort, so I want to give a shout out to all the other colleagues that participated in the development of this thing and did all the hard work to make it ready for you guys today.
Cool. So the first thing we want to say is show you what is the name of this exam. And those of you who have taken our exams before, you're going to notice that it follows a convention that you may have known already. So for example, it's at the associate level, it's an engineer level, and obviously that Gen AI word. One interesting thing I'd like to bring up is when Corey and I were preparing this, Corey was mentioning why this exam, Gen AI of course, but why this exam, and he told me something really interesting about today's unstructured data. Do you want to make a comment about that?
Yeah, so something like 95% of the data that's in any enterprise is going to be unstructured. And generative AI is one of the technologies that you can use to unlock value in a lot of that data. And then at the same time, there's a lot of great tools out there for using SQL and things like that, but everybody knows how to speak natural language. So being able to unlock a lot of new capabilities does require generative AI technology. So that's why I think this certification is going to be super important.
Okay, cool. Okay, so again, I am one of the certification professionals, so I'm going to be giving you some of the details. Now, here's the big secret about this exam. It's in my interest for you to be successful, okay? Because I want this to be a well-taken exam. I want you all to be successful. So please follow us along. What you're going to hear are tips and tricks, and I'm going to keep giving them to you. Hint, this is important. You're going to see this exam from many different perspectives, but we're going to try to help you. How can you prepare yourself and be successful, okay? So first, the certification background. Let's ask ourselves why. So obviously it's getting certified in Databricks and Gen AI. Now here's our first data point, okay? The exam equals cutting edge LLM chain agents RAG plus Databricks. Now we're going to dive into what that is, okay? Now, just a couple sort of administrative details. This is brand new for Databricks in terms of a learning path. Some of you may have gone to some of our courses here at Summit. We now have a learning path specifically for the Databricks Gen AI engineer. And I want to be very clear that some of your ML skills, if you have them already or you're already certified, will help you. But this is completely separate, and you don't need to take any of our content nor be certified in ML. And like our associate's exams, for those of us who've never taken our exams before, this is one exam to get the certification, which has a 2-year validity. Sounds cool?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so what is our scope? Okay, our scope for this exam, we're going to break this down to you. Like I said, it's in our interest for you to be successful here. We're going to focus on in scope and out of scope first. So these are topic areas that you're going to be take an exam on. So you obviously can read all there, but what I want to do first for you is please break out those 3 first in scope bullet points. You're going to see problem decomposition is its own subject. Talk about that in a minute. And you're going to see the LLM-based stuff, and then our technology from Databricks. And then we're going to talk about out of scope. So our resident expert, Corey, do you want to kind of guide them with in and out of scope?
Sure. So some of the things that are out of scope, let's talk about problem decomposition for a second. So if you go in, these models are super powerful, but if you go in with the mindset of, oh, I can just take this query from my user, pass it directly to an LLM, and it's just going to magically come up with exactly what I intended it to come up with, it's not going to work out very well. In fact, it's probably a recipe for disaster. So you have to be able to sit down and think about, work with your stakeholders and understand exactly what you want this thing to be able to respond to, what you would like it to not respond to, and how would you actually get an LLM to respond in the way that you want. So problem decomposition is super important. And then once you've got the problem decomposed, then how do you select the right models, tools, and approaches to be able to have the LLM basically come up with the way that you would want it to respond to the model? And of course, we apply Databricks technology throughout all of this. So we have solutions for efficient similarity search using vector search, for serving both your language models themselves, for any orchestration logic, for your embedding models. And then how do you get those things logged in MLflow and then registered in Unity Catalog? When we think about out of scope, so whenever you're developing these certifications, you do have to draw a line. So fine-tuning, pre-training, those things are all like really important things, and there will be some use cases where you do have to apply those sorts of techniques. But for this particular exam at this time, those things are like off the exam. So if you need those things, use them by all means. And if you want to go ahead and study up for it, maybe that may help you with a future exam or something like that. But at least for now, those are out of scope for the associate's level.
So Corey said something that's really cool. So the out of scope, it is true. We could possibly come up with a secondary exam that's down the line. So we'll talk about that later on, maybe in the question and answer period for you. Okay, so I'm going to do sort of the certification geek thing for a second and talk to you about the MQC. So I talked to you about these problem areas, and so in certification, we have this ideal exam candidate. So you saw what we scoped to. Now let's talk about who this person is, because hopefully it's you or will be you shortly, okay? So let's break it down to basics. The MQC can design and implement LLM solutions using Databricks. Very simple concept, and here comes something interesting. Has consumed all learning, I'm going to show you where to find that learning, and has 6 months hands-on experience. Now, whenever I give that, everyone's like, so James, what you're telling me is I have to wait 6 months to take this. The answer is no, because I don't know how fast you can learn and how performant you are. What I do need you to do is that when we look at the objectives that I'm going to show you, they were scoped to what we think someone using the tool for its intended purposes, we're telling you, can learn in about 6 months. So it's not a golden rule. You may do it faster, you may do it slower. Okay, so Corey and I are going to bang on again and again about the exam guide. Now, those of you who've taken our exams before, you probably know about these documents. This holds all your secrets. This is going to tell you how you're going to be successful, and we are going to go over it, okay? But what I'd like you to do, because I know you guys like to read, and you should read, the audience description right there is your first block to ask yourself, does that sound like me? All right, so it's going to mention those topic areas we talked to you about. It's going to mention the technologies we talked to you about. And the last sentence really is what is going to sum up what we expect. All right, so we talked about the scope, and you'll notice that this is a little bit more refined in terms of the skill areas. Now, notice those three major bullet points. So it's still the same thing. So now I'm going to invite Corey to make a little bit more detailed give you a little bit more detailed information about those bullet points.
Sure. So, we really wanted to focus with this exam on practical skills that you would use to develop generative AI-based applications on Databricks today. So you will see things like, common libraries like you may use. So if you are familiar with our demos and so forth, things that you see us using there, those are very much, in scope for things that you may see on the exam. Any of the technology, so if you've been following along with our announcements and you've seen things like vector search and model serving, feature and function endpoints, so you can do things like tools, things like that. Those are going to be things that are going to be important to know. Basically, like if you take a step back and think about what it takes to actually get a generative AI application into production, that's why we mentioned about having 6 months of real world experience. Like whenever you go through developing one of these applications, you'll bump into all the things that would be in scope for the exam. James did a great job of pulling together a pretty diverse set of practitioners from across different verticals. So this is really fed by our interactions over the last couple, over a year now of interactions with customers who are building these things in the field. So it really is informed by a lot of practical experience.
Cool. And I had this question actually for Corey because I'm still new to Databricks and stuff. Like with Unity Catalog, I wouldn't think that this would be on this exam, but you were mentioning to me that it is quite important for this role.
Super important. Yeah, Unity Catalog is crucial for building data and AI applications in general. But for large language models, where it really comes into play is a lot of times you are dealing with a lot of data flows that are coming in to power these LM applications. And you have to be able to securely share that information with all the people who need to get access to it. And then you need to be able to track the lineage and the provenance of that data as it works through the system, both to make sure that you're developing a safe and secure application in the first place, and then also to keep it secure after you launch it into production. You also need to be able to take advantage of things like lineage. So whenever you run into problems in production, how do you trace that back to the actual source of the problem? So that's the reason that Unity Catalog is so important.
Cool, thank you. Okay, now we're gonna look at the exam sections. Again, to bring this all together to you, I've talked about these sort of topic areas, then we talked about major skills, and now we're talking about exam sections. And the interesting thing is, you're obviously, when you're taking the exam, not gonna see this. What you're gonna see when you finish your exam is the exam will report to you and be part of your, what we call web assessor. It's Databricks certification, your transcript. It will be, these are the exam sections. So all of your questions are underneath, let's call it, these individual sections, and I'm going to show that to you. Now, if you take a look at that, and let's read it together right now, what you're going to see is we've structured it actually in the sequence of design, development, and deployment of one of these systems, okay? Comments about our design?
Yeah, so it's roughly along, how you might think of a methodology, but it's not intended to be like a structured sort of waterfall approach. We recognize that all these things are going to be iterative. These are just the high-level topic areas that we chose to pull questions from that we felt like would be, reasonable things to ask someone who can basically produce generative AI applications on Databricks today.
All right, cool. Okay, so next step is let's go in one step deeper. Okay, so now for the next couple of minutes, we're going to take a topic-by-topic look at the sections, and Corey's going to give us some maybe insider advice, or just what's behind there. So this is going to be useful for you. First thing, let me explain what you're looking at first. You see a percentage next to each exam section, okay? That is the overall percentage of questions presented against the total exam. If you want to think about a weighting, there you go, weighting. So we'll look at the app development section of the exam is twice as large as the first two, which are design and data prep. All right, so let's walk them through.
Sure, so we'll start off with designing applications. So we talked a little bit about problem decomposition. So this is sort of going along with that. So this is basically, given a specific scenario, can you take a look at the requirements and scope out like a high-level set of what you actually want that thing to do, and then come up with a basic design sketch of the different components that you might need. So what sort of prompts are you going to need? What are the characteristics of those prompts? So does prompt for one component need to return a JSON object? Does a prompt for another component need to actually structure the response that the end user is going to see? And then you also need to think about model selection. So do you need, for a given component, do you need to choose like a really large, high capacity model, or do you need a smaller one? Are you going to be able to use like proprietary, like SAS model, or do you need to use an open source one? Things like that. And then we also think about chaining. So will you be able to get away with just doing a single call to your LLM, or are you going to have to structure it into multiple calls? Are you going to have to create a chain of prompts and then calling into other data sources to pull information from like a retrieval system into your LLM? Are you going to need to apply things like multi-stage reasoning? So designing applications is all about coming up with, can you think at a higher level of what the overall sketch is for your application, and then go build the rest of those components and apply them. So you will see some questions around that higher level. Then we move into data preparation. And here's where we get into, interesting thing that we've observed in the field. Most of the applications that people are deploying today for generative AI do pull in some sort of data. So being able to work with data is super important. Can you come up with the right data sources? Can you make sure that you avoid potentially problematic data sources? Once you've identified a data source, do you know how to actually load that data into the system? Can you come up with a strategy for both content ingestion, and then can you get it into a form where you can actually start working with it? Most data sources are going to need some kind of filtering. You may have to scan that data. Even if you've identified an appropriate data source, it may still have documents in there that you need to weed out. So how do you curate your data? How do you set up that content pipeline so that that data can be updated over time? And then also, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of each of those components? And how do you chunk your documents into a form that your LLM can work with effectively? Then we move on to the largest section, like James mentioned, app development. So we do have a lot of questions from here. And again, the exam guide is going to have the details on each one of these things that we're talking about. This is really just to give you kind of a flavor of what's there. But this is where we'll ask questions about, like, do you know how to actually craft a prompt that can achieve a specific objective? So do you understand the basics of prompt engineering and that sort of thing? Do you know how to set up that retrieval system and actually get that information that you retrieved injected into your prompt so that it can actually have an impact on the results? Do you know how to implement things like guardrails? Do you know how to help minimize and mitigate hallucinations? Are you aware that models have different context lengths and that you may have to adjust what you're feeding into the model to make sure that you don't exceed that context length and end up with a bad situation?
Okay. All right, so that's the first half of the exam, and now we're going to go to the second one, exams 4 and 6. Let's take a look at those percentages again. So once again, we see assembling and deploying a lot larger, right, than governance and evaluation. And here's Corey to take us down to the next level.
Yeah, so once you have your logic developed, how do you actually take all those components that you developed and make them available for your end users? So you're going to have a lot of models that are involved with this thing potentially. So how do you get all those models logged into MLflow? And that's both your language model itself and the embedding models that you're going to use, but then also the orchestration logic. So you can log all that stuff into MLflow and then get it registered in Unity Catalog. Once you have it there, how do you actually take those embedding models, language models, orchestration models, and get those served up on model serving endpoints? Do you know the basics of the ins and outs of how you would deploy those things? Do you know how to set up external models so that you can refer to models that are potentially hosted outside of Databricks? And then you're also going to want to know how to serve your data. So do you know how to set up like a vector search endpoint and create vector indexes on that? And do you know how to populate those vector indexes? Do you know how to get all that stuff structured in Unity Catalog? So that's all about assembling and deploying applications. Then we move on to governance, and that's where we're really talking about basics around like AI safety and responsible AI. So do you know how to set up a basic guardrail system for your application? Do you know how to implement masking and that sort of thing? Do you know, are you aware of some of the malicious prompts that your application may experience? And do you know how to protect against that sort of thing? Do you know how to look for problematic text in your RAG data? And are you at least aware enough of legal and licensing concerns that come with particular to large language model-based applications, so you know when to reach out to your legal counsel or your legal team? Then lastly, we get into evaluation and monitoring. And this is where a lot of people really struggle with developing LLMs in practice. Actually, by focusing a little bit on problem decomposition and understanding what you want your application to do in the first place is actually a big key to understanding how you're going to evaluate it. But are you able, given that specific thing that you want your application to do, can you come up with an evaluation system so that you can measure whether it's actually doing that thing effectively? And so that you can choose the right components and come up with the right set of alternatives that achieves the overall objective for your system. And then once you get your application into production, do you know how to capture the request-response pairs so that you can take a look at those evaluation metrics over time and look for potential problems and improve the performance of your application once it's actually launched? And then also, how do you keep an eye on the costs? So running these LLM applications requires a lot of compute, requires a lot of different components that can end up being costly. So like for any other application, how do you manage that cost? Do you have some basic idea for where to go in Databricks to implement those sorts of controls and get that type of information?
Okay, are you ready to test them?
Let's go for it.
Okay, the first thing, nobody's going to be embarrassed, so don't worry about it. I just want to ask everybody, based on what we've told you right now, who feels pretty strong about this stuff? Just raise your hands. I'm not going to test you. Does anybody feel strong in this stuff? Maybe a couple, all right? Again, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a question, and we're going to ask you to answer it. Now, please don't give us the answer. We want you to think it in your head, okay? And then we're going to give you what the right answer is. You ready? Looking good? All right, here you go. Go for it. I'm not gonna ask you this yet. Just if you're done reading the question, look at me, but there's no rush. No rush. Alrighty, so again, don't give us the answers. Keep it in your brain. Alrighty, you ready? You ready to see if you're right or wrong? You ready? Let's go. Which one's the right answer? I don't remember.
Yeah, so the right answers on this one, it's asking about, changing the response generating LM, and you see some error with prompt token count exceeding a certain limit. And it asks for 2 solutions, and the 2 solutions on this one are D and E. So decreasing the chunk size of the embedded documents, or reducing the number of records that are retrieved from the vector database.
All right, cool. I got some good nods of, yeah, I got it. I got some laughs. Okay, sorry? All right, that's good too. That's good. Okay, so what we want to do, obviously, is give you the flavor. And we're going to show you some sample questions too as well. Yeah, I won't go into that right now. So obviously, we want you to be successful. We want this exam to be powerful in our industry. We're really proud of it. So we want to talk to you about some exam preparation, okay? So Corey and I mentioned this exam guide. I think some of you have taken our exams before, have seen it. I want to go over this with you because this is where all of your, I keep saying secrets, but it's how you're going to plan your attack, okay? So the exam guide. Now, in that exam guide, we're going to talk about Databricks courseware. Now, in Databricks certification, we talk about our courseware being the pillar that supports certification, but it's not the only one, okay? So sometimes people say, well, I want to take this course and then take the certification. That's not how we work. We have a broader spectrum of skills and practical knowledge that we need you to be able to demonstrate. And again, I'm going to help you kind of figure that out. As well, we're going to talk about today's LLM-based APIs and tools because you need to know them. They're outside of Databricks, and we're going to mention them in the exam guide when you need them. And also, many people don't realize, and I recommend, if you see something on the exam guide that completely mystifies you, what I always do is I go to Databricks documentation and I try and do different searches to find out, to orient me why I don't know what this thing is. So that's kind of a basic way to do it. Before we look at the exam guide, any advice you want to give them?
The other one that I would mention, I think everything that James mentioned is spot on. Being familiar with the documentation, taking a look at our courseware. The other thing for me as a practitioner is just going and trying to build some of this stuff. So if you actually get into a situation where you have an opportunity to either participate in a hackathon or just come up with like a personal project, if you go build some of this stuff and apply, take a look at the stuff that's in the exam guide and think about how you would use it. If you try to do this stuff, you'll run into the exact same scenarios that you'll be asked about on the actual exam. And that's going to give you those crucial little insights that's going to let you pick out the right answer, because it'll ask you things like, what's the best way to do this sort of thing? If you've tried it out, you'll realize, oh yeah, if you do it that way, it's going to be totally messed up. So getting some practical experience is another one I would definitely take advantage of.
Okay, cool. So let's move over for a second. Let's move over to the exam guide. Okay, so this is currently live. If you may have noticed, we haven't done, Databricks certification didn't do a big splash just yet. This exam came out of its beta test with flying colors, I might add, about 4 weeks ago. So some people were involved in the beta test. It's been thoroughly psychometrically validated, which is what I do to make sure that it performs according to the standard that we set for it. Okay, so we haven't had a really big announcement. So you guys are actually getting the first skinny of anybody, aside from our beta testers, on this exam, okay? So Corey's really good, talk to you about the individual topics is cool. Now we're gonna give you a little bit more, okay, on some ideas about that. Okay, so this is all standard stuff, but here we go. Let's take a look at what we're telling you for recommended preparation. We told you this already in so many different terms, but what I want everyone to notice there is the word knowledge of, okay? So you can say to myself, these are, and by the way, this is currently live in Databricks certification, okay? We have a new pathway. You press a button, you get this on the exam guide, all right? The knowledge of. Now, current LLMs and their capabilities. Well, that's going to change. And this exam will change as time goes on, okay? So what Corey was telling you is the exam is based upon at least a year of our staff interacting with customers and how they're currently building the current tools. Now, in a moment, I'll tell you how to figure out what that knowledge of is in a minute. Okay, so you have all this knowledge and working knowledge of Python and specific libraries. Okay, so here comes, I want to say the big deal. You call it what you want. These are your exam objectives. For every objective you see, you will be presented with one question that expresses that concept. So if I had to do, I would use this as a checklist. I would go over and ask myself, can I apply a chunking strategy under data prep for a given document structure and model constraints? Well, wait a minute. What is Databricks, how do they think about that? Let me look up chunking and let me see some of their documentation. Let me go to my preparation materials in the courseware and let me try and reverse engineer that, all right? So for all of these objectives, and there are 45 because this is a 45 item exam, okay? That is how you're going to study for this, okay? So again, beating a dead horse, but I would go completely to this objective list and start my training and my preparation if you don't feel you're ready. Okay, so finally let's call it a bit of a sales pitch. Why should you care? Why should you do this? Well, I mean, I work for Databricks, so I'm pretty excited about our company and where we're going, so that's what I think, but you have to decide why you want to do it. So why certify? We're going to give you a couple arguments here. Gen AI, nobody knows about that. You know, no one's talking about that. So obviously you want to confirm your skills in the most in-demand tech. We recommend, Corey and I were talking about it, the beta testers and the initial people who have uptake this already, they're already growing on LinkedIn, all right? And I'm really happy for them. We've seen a lot of really good success stories. We've seen people skill up really quickly with the exam guide and be able to do it. So show your organization that you got this. That's one thing we want to say. And I'm going to ask Corey to mention his take on these 3 bullet points. The other thing is get on the path now because we're hinting to you that this path is going to grow. Okay, so it's good to get to the associate. If and when pro happens, I can't confirm or deny anything, that would be your next step and we'll build upon this. So I think now's the time to get on the train. But what do you think?
Yeah, so I think one of the big reasons for me is just because generative AI has proven to be so useful over the last couple of, several months or over a year now. So it's a really exciting area to be in. And we think that a lot of companies are going to get a lot of value from it. But, it's good to have tools and so forth that you can use to produce generative AI applications, but the tools don't work themselves. So you have to have people who are skilled in this sort of thing and who know how to use these tools to actually produce, good applications. For me personally, why do I like to do certifications? I think the main thing for me is it helps me to go through and identify any gaps that I have in my knowledge. So, a certification, you pull together some people who have a diverse background, who have interacted with a lot of customers who are doing this in the field, and we've seen sort of what are some of the pitfalls that people can bump into that causes them to sort of stumble in their generative AI journey. So certification gives me an opportunity to basically go through and identify any gaps that I have in my knowledge or skills and go fill those gaps. The other thing that I would say is that, as a tech lead or a manager, why would I like to see something like that on someone's resume or on their job profile? It's not necessarily like an end-all be-all. So it's not like you would look at a certification and say, oh, I should hire you just because you have the certification. It's not like that. But it does indicate that this person's taking the time to go study these things, try to fill in those sorts of knowledge gaps that they have, and they have crossed a certain bar for how much they understand about this area. And then lastly, I think, from an organization perspective, why would an organization be interested in sponsoring let's get my data science team certified on Gen AI at Databricks? And the interesting thing is that it really produces a lot of interesting and useful side effects. So I've experienced this a couple of times in my career now. You'll see all these study groups form, and sometimes having the study groups form where people are getting together and talking about a topic like Gen AI helps to facilitate a lot of knowledge sharing across your organization. So in terms of upskilling your entire organization, it can have a lot of effects like that. You'll see people throw out hackathons so that you can get that sort of practical experience and help prepare for the exam. And then the exam itself, the certification process, gives you a cherry on top. So you've got this sort of target that everyone's working towards. And then once you get that target achieved, then it gives you a nice little cherry on top to say, okay, look, we did this. We're good.
That's cool.